Okay, and welcome. We're into another one of our philosophy classes. We're now into the wisdom books. So, the Book of Job is one of the main Jewish wisdom books of the Old Testament. It captures some of the different investigations into the philosophy of wisdom that really abounded at the time. So, we can also cover off a number of other Greco-Roman texts around the same model, and we're going to look at those as well. But if we look at Job, we've got a book that is in three parts. We have really an introduction and a conclusion that are really prose, but a poetic center of a story that is designed in such a way that it can be well, read and memorized by a lot of people, and that is most likely written and rewritten over a series of different times. So, looking at what we're going to cover today, we're looking at the sort of nature of wisdom literature, the construction of the book, the sort of questions that we're really asking. I mean, it's a simple question, but like many things, simple questions can be really, really complex. So, why does God do bad things to good people or good things to bad people? And can the divine be seen in that which is human? And how are we really able to link the actions of the divine with humanity, and even can we expect to? So let's get right into this. And old Job there was punished. For those who've read already, we're really looking again at the concept of justice. So you'll probably find that there's a lot of an underlying theme along many of the different sessions I've done, whether it's Plato, Aristotle, etc. And the concept of justice is really debating what is right in here from a divine point of view. Is it right that we should punish individuals who've done no wrong? And the book of Job really points that out with the nature of, is it okay for someone like Job to basically, well, seemingly be righteous and then go through life with all of these hardships? Why does that happen? And of course, this is a very common refrain. It's a question that we all really want to understand. Why, in this world, if there's a divine, good God, would he allow bad things to happen? But then we don't understand anyway. So we have a world here full of all sorts of evils. But some of the arguments to this would be, maybe this is the best world that could be. Maybe it's all our own choices. Maybe it's just the actions that we have. And this is where we now have things like restorative justice come in. So Job there, by the end of his life, of course, has everything he lost returned, and even some more. But is that really restorative in nature? Is it okay to lose everything and then have it given back? So now, one of the arguments for God is that God is both omnipotent and omniscient, knows and understands everything. But, well, does that mean that we have a deity who needs to act? Or do we leave it to ourselves? And this actually comes into one of the fundamental differences between the pagan and other religions, and even that of like different aspects of Christianity, and even the other sort of Abrahamic religions such as Islam and, of course, Judaism. In the Mosaic Law, which sort of straddles all of the three major Abrahamic religions, we have the same questions. We have this, what is good, what is bad, and why do we get punished? So we have a book that is really telling us how much we fail to understand, well, not only God, but the purpose of the world. And a conclusion of all this, and Job gets it at the end, even though he has direct conversations with God is that we'll just never know. We won't ever in this life have an opportunity to truly understand the reasoning of the universe. In some ways, and I didn't put this in a reference, we have the equivalent of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In the Hitchhiker series, of course, you go through all of this, and the interdimensional beings who became mice on Earth create a entire sort of multi-generational project to build the Earth as a computer to answer the question of the meaning of life. And the answer to the question is 42. Of course, everyone's disappointed, but then no one understands what the question is. So we go around and we go, oh, maybe the question's 6 by 7 and all these other silly things. But understanding the nature of the question, of course, is one aspect of all of the necessity of getting to the bottom of what is meant. But we don't even understand the question. So next, the nature of the book is related to a number of other things. It's some of the Solomaic texts, such as Psalms. So looking at the Psalms, we also see a whole lot of wisdom literature, and the Mosaic law really captured with Proverbs examples of how to live. And this part of the wisdom literature here was very interesting in that, well, it doesn't really give the same sorts of answers, but then there's no real descriptions in either Psalms or other aspects of Mosaic law either. So Proverbs gives us a lot of examples of what we can do to have a good life. If we go through the Psalms, we have lots of pieces of wisdom that say, really, this is how you could expect to live, but they're not commandments per se. So in understanding this, we could treat our life like that of Job, and we could go, oh, but we're righteous and we're good. But does that mean that we deserve to have everything happen in a good way? Are we doing this because? So if we think about the introduction of the new Protestant religions, and we look at Calvin, one of the aspects of early Calvinism was not knowing whether you were saved or not. So a part of what people sought to do in living a good life and being good was actually to demonstrate that they were already saved. Because they can live this life, because they are worthy, they must be one of the saved. But who remembers a little bit of both Plato and Aristotle, like in Crito and others, the stories around happiness? Anyone want to have a bit of a thought about what Plato thought about?
Wasn't it something where that's not the for him that wasn't the goal, but it was
well, it's not the goal. It's not like Epicurus, but it's more the concept of you don't even know that you've had a good life, and you can't argue a good life until it ends. Because if we think about a certain Greek king who was captured by the Persians and faced death and execution, only to be let off and become a high slave, then we have to remember that what may be seemingly very good now could go away. And the same thing happens to Job. Everything seems wonderful, and he's going through life and he's happy and it's all good, and then it's not. But sometimes we gain lessons out of it. An example of my own life, when I was in my early 20s, I had already gone out there and applied for health insurance, and then part of the sort of process of getting health insurance, I needed to have medical checkups, and during a medical checkup, I got a diagnosis where I was told I had cancer. And not only that, I was told that if I didn't have an operation the next day, I'd probably be dead in 6 months. And I literally had an operation the next day. So I could argue that that's bad. I could also argue it's good, because if I hadn't gone in there and hadn't been told about it, then I wouldn't be here today. So equally, it changed my attitude to life. Unlike most 21, 22-year-olds who, well, basically coast through life thinking their life is endless, the first thing that happened when I was over cancer was I started working my butt off. Every day became important to me. So
I think one of the things I was thinking, sorry to interrupt, but was we were talking about it with the utopia, why it's not possible. And I think it plays into this where it's like the hardship actually gives you purpose. So it's like, how could you know pleasure without some sort of pain? And it's almost as if there's like that phrase, it's like no mud, no blood. And it's like the flower, so to speak, is poured out of the mud and the bad conditions.
So what we find in each of these wisdom texts is a means to gain a better understanding of knowledge and philosophical ideals of truth. So even though it is theology, it is the Bible, of course, that doesn't mean that it's all bad. I mean, I'm a pastor, so I have a different view than some people, but I believe that even if you don't necessarily believe, that these books enable us to learn, just like many of the other parts of the Western canon, how to be a good, rational, constructive part of society. And that in itself is important. So looking at old Job there, as I said earlier on, we have a couple chapters, the beginning and the end. We start with effectively really literature, and then we have a center of the book that is verse and poetry. And now the last verses really conclude the story, but it goes into Job being nice and happy. His friends, of course, blame him, as many of us probably even do now. If we think about it, when we see someone suffer, we see them fall into hard times, do we necessarily sit there and go, oh, well, it's not their fault, of course? And quite often we look at what's happened and we go, oh, what did they do wrong? And we ignore that there are many random aspects of life. So in doing this, we also find that Job does a little bit of cursing and complaining. Who can blame him, really? But that demonstrates some of his attitude. And from a point of view of a all-powerful deity, Job sits there going, why me? I don't deserve it. And even in itself, that becomes partially sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy as to why Job may have, but it's not even that. So God, of course, speaks to Job in 2 sections of the book. Job gets a bit of a why is this happening, and doesn't really understand. But equally, why would God decide to have a bit of a chat with the devil, so to speak? I mean, that's an interesting question in itself. So if you look at some other literature, you'll have the apocalyptic God and the devil in true Manichaean sense, separated and in their own realms. But that's not really the case here, is it? I mean, God's upstairs and the devil's over there having a bit of a chat with him. Like, it's tea and biscuits time. I mean, yeah. So it's interesting when equally we have the whole, oh, devils down there like Dante being punished in hell, but then we go upstairs and we go, hey God, how you doing? Yeah, I'm sick of being punished for the moment. I'm just going to have a bit of coffee with you. I'll go back down afterwards. I know hell's sort of in need of me to flap my wings and keep it cold in the lowest level, but yeah. So we have a celebration of wisdom, which is interesting. I mean, chapter 28 is probably not part of the original text. It's in itself a very interesting component, but it doesn't read as if it's the same author. So we have chapter 28, a celebration of wisdom, but it's sort of chucked in there as if it was something, different. Same with Eliu. That's possibly added at a later period as well. So each of these sections really goes into a series of arguments that are hard to really put together as one. But if we think about some of the communications, and I'm going to have a bit of a read here of some of the early parts of Job. So Eliphaz speaks to Job. Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off? Even if I've seen that they plow inequity and sow wickedness, reap the same. So chapter 4, 7 to 8. So this is a friend. Does it sound much like a friend? I mean, if we think about it for a moment. Or Bildad, chapter 8, verse 20. Behold, God will not cast away a perfect man, neither will he help the evildoers. So far, his friends don't seem like the best of friends, do they? Zophar. I mean, old Zophar here at chapter 11, verse 6. Know therefore that God enacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserveth. So, hey guys, things are a bit tough for me right now. My family's died. I lost my business. Everything's not going well. Oh, you bugger, what have you done wrong? Do these sound to you like someone that you would consider to be a good friend in the first place? So Eliu, of course, in chapter 32 appears, and against Job was his wrath kindled because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his three friends was his wrath kindled because they had found no answer, yet had condemned Job. Chapter 33, 2 to 3. So really it comes to God doesn't only sort of get a bit upset sending an angel down, but gets pissed off not only with Job, but also Job's friends. So it doesn't seem like Job's friends are acting terribly, friendly, at least to me. I don't know if I'd want friends like that. Then, of course, we have later on, as I said, Job has a bit of a chat to God, chapter 38, 4. God goes on, talks about the wonders of creation. Ask Job, can you build this? Comes up with, deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold every one that is proud and abase him. Look on every one that is proud and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then I will also confess unto thee that thine own right hand can save thee. That's probably an answer to the problem in a way, but it answers everyone in the poem at the same time. So, but they also don't really know about the wager. So, do you think that would have changed their concept of how all this was? Possibly, hey. So we don't really have an answer. I mean, there might be one, but it's not one that's available to us. And the design of divine reward, punishment, how the universe is constructed, what the purpose is, well, we can make hypotheses, but and there's no actual way of testing it. Unfortunately for us, we can't step outside the universe and run a series of statistical tests seeing which particular universe works best. I mean, empirical study vis-a-vis Burke or someone like this, well, it's not really going to work. I mean, old Kelvin there in the early days of science, or even Newton, wouldn't have been able to step outside the universe and go, well, let's run up a few different universes and see which one works better. Unfortunately, we don't have that opportunity. So this also leads into the typical Richard Dawkins type atheistic argument that there must be no deity or equivalent in the universe because, well, obviously it's all random and that's it. I mean, it's not really much of an answer. Seems to me a cop-out. I'm sorry, I couldn't be bothered thinking about it. There's nothing to say. That's really what it comes down to, in my opinion. So other than randomness, misfortune is just probability. Well, maybe, but I don't like to actually believe that the entirety of all aesthetic value and the creation of humanity is just an accident. Why consciousness? Why aren't we mindless zombies going through like XRP supporters? I mean, at the end of the day, on top of this, is God capricious? Any ideas of any examples of rather capricious gods?
I mean, I guess to answer the question, God is not capricious or evil. I mean, he's testing Job, but it's due to the wages.
I always wondered whether or not it was because man had got to a point where he was starting to believe that he was better than God. So therefore God is going to test him because actually man isn't better than God, kind of thing. And that's, so it's like an ego thing.
Possibly, but all of this is very different to the nature of grace in the New Testament. So, and if we think for a moment, the nature of Greco-Roman gods, they're very capricious. They act on fate, and there's no necessary. I mean, they're very human in some ways, but they're also one moment they'll reward you, and the next they'll smack you down. So, the other thing is omniscient and omnipotent gods. If we have multiple deities competing, that's one answer to this. The Manichaeans liked to believe that we had a good and an evil god, each battling for dominance and domination of the universe, which many people still attribute to Christianity and don't even realize that it's not a Christian thing with the whole battling of Satan and God. The Christian concept is God is supreme, and like in Job, we have a God that rules, and if he wants the devil to come up and have coffee, he can. So we have a completely in control God that we have no idea why any of this exists, and we go through life not knowing why some get punished, some get rewarded. It's just outside our ability to understand. But that doesn't mean that we can't implement human justice, of course. So divine and human justice are very different things. And in the poem, of course, we get to see Job represented in many different ways. We see him both as a God-fearing righteous man, just arbitrarily and capriciously seeming to be cast into suffering. And then we see the throne of God with a permission to test Job's goodness and devotion. But even that seems to some people to be rather capricious. I mean, we have someone seemingly good who's now cast into all bad. And That's an interesting sort of dichotomy against Genesis there, 131. God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good.
I have a
That
question.
includes the bad.
Could it be argued that God is neither good nor evil, but is just? And in that, with Job, regarding Job, is that he saw Job as being too proud and too self-righteous, because he was sacrificing animals because he thought his children had sinned, and he couldn't perceive himself having sinned because he was so proud of righteousness. And in God's justice, rather than good or evil, he made it just that Job, he agreed with Satan that Job would suffer because it was just, because he had so much, and yet truly didn't have faith in such.
Well, they can be argued, but then I go back to Genesis 131. Behold, it was very good. Not just good, very good. So everything that we have in this universe is very good. But what's God's interpretation of very good? We don't even know that. And of course, there is the difference between divine and human justice in itself. What is a standard of divine justice? Unfortunately, again, we have no concept of this. So we have to try and wallow through in the darkness and try and find a way of rationalizing what is good, bad, and try and find how do we work out what is the ideal way of living. So we're really in this, we have philosophy, we have theology, and we can analyze ethics and morals, but it comes down to still debating what we think is right and wrong. And we're all in Christian religion fallen. So there's that as well. If we consider in the Christian concept, pre-Nietzsche, we have a world where we are all sinners, and we are all only saved by grace. That was the whole part of Christ in the New Testament. So we have iniquity, we have suffering, but we have no idea why. So Job's friends, they really don't give much advice that is any good. To them, God punishes the wicked. That sounds very simple and easy, but does that mean that Job was wicked? Yet, from what we know, Job did nothing wrong other than maybe a little bit of pride in what he did, but there are many people with far more pride than that, isn't there? Job's level of pride wasn't, God, if that's the case, then I should be getting punished on a daily basis. I try not to have too much hubris, but there's pride and there's pride.
But my argument against that is that you've already been through the ringer, so to speak, and so this is your comeuppance, like in the story of Job, how he got rewarded with everything afterwards. This, in my story of Craig Wright, you are in the start of that reward phase of Job.
Maybe, but who knows? So, we got to remember as well that if Job's done nothing, then God's unjust. So, but we don't really understand any of this. It comes always back to human ignorance in all of these arguments. So we can take the simple, just sloth it all away so we don't even need to think about it, Richard Dawkins' answer, which is it's probability and randomness. Just put up with it. And that, of course, leads us to things like the Rawlsian approach to social justice, where because we don't know what we will be, we have this blind sort of choice out there. Well, what we need to do is equalize everything for everyone, because some people start better off and worse off than others. Yep, I don't like Rawlsian. Not a Rawlsian. Anyway, so who remembers Oedipus the King, Oedipus Rex, and some of his little story? He's an interesting fellow. Had a nice little flounce through life. Became a king. Married his mother, it turns out. Yeah, he ended a little bit different than Job, of course. Old Oedipus ended up taking his own eyes out because he couldn't live with himself and see himself in the mirror anymore. And again, it comes down to pride, but in examining the fate and misfortune of Oedipus, Oedipus raises himself up through his own struggles, but he also goes back to the fates. His family cast him out because they were told that their son would come and kill them, kill the father. And what happens? Of course, their actions in casting out Oedipus has Oedipus, well, killed the father. Yeah, so next time, don't listen to the damn fates. Anyway, so maybe he was selected for his pride, as I've said, but we don't actually know that. So Oedipus was written for stage direction, which differs from old Job there. Job is poetic verse, but there are some similarities and differences between each of these. So can the divine be seen in that which is human? There's an interesting question for you. What do you think?
I don't think so. It's kind of like a fish in water. I mean, you could have glimpses of it, but it's a totally different perspective. That's how I see it.
Well, I mean, how do we know that there aren't sparks of divine in us?
Yeah, I'm going to disagree slightly with Kevin there, and I'm going to say that you can see, well, Craig took the words out of my mouth, but you can see sparks of divinity in humans sometimes, but you can't see the whole divine thing in a single human at any given time, only glimpses.
Well, that the nature of divinity is that it is all things at all times. So wherever you look, you should be able to see it if you are perceptive of it.
Well, that goes into a question that Diddy mentioned, which is, if God is all-knowing, would he know the depths that Satan would go to test Job? Well, yes, he would. But then equally, he would know the outcome and how Job's life would eventually be better. So, I mean, he would know that, in 2 years' time, we're going to make everything better again, and you're going to have more children and yada, yada, yada. So, I mean, it's a hard question there. If you know how things work out, what would you do? I mean, I get the question in relation to Bitcoin. If you could go back and change things, what would you change? And my answer is generally probably nothing. Because if I change things, then I've got a whole lot of other problems to go through that I don't actually know. And as soon as I change one thing, everything that flows from it also ripples down and changes. So, well, where we are now, I'm quite happy with. Maybe if everything was in a basket case of a sort of scenario, I might not be so happy, but it's not. So that goes back to our old bit by Aristotle: he who is not dead cannot be called happy. So the definition of happy for Aristotle, of course, isn't what many of us today try and assume. Aristotle and the US founding fathers, the people behind the Federalists, the early congressmen, etc., in the US, had a very different concept of happiness to what many of us take today. They weren't talking about pleasure. It wasn't, I've gone out to see this movie concert or anything like this. Happiness would be, I have a good family, my family love me, I have a good job, I like my work, I'm productive, I'm building something, I'm useful, which is not an instant thing. It's not, I feel right now really, really joyful, and which is the instant gratification. Let's pop a pill of ecstasy or MDMA or something like this, and change our mental state. Happiness through chemistry idea of the United States. It's something that builds up over time. that we do work on. So we also have the concept of maybe all of this is in the next life. There's not really a lot of clarity in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, the concept of justice is next life, which to many seems like a cop-out as well. So maybe we've done things. We have Job's friends sitting there pointing fingers at him. But, well, why did Job get good fortune in the first place? There's another question. Was Job who he is because of what's happened? Maybe if Job had a hard life in the beginning, he wouldn't have ended up quite Job. So
it's nothing to say that his previous life was hard, but work hard, keep these things.
But there's also another argument here is when Job's sitting there going, I deserve, I mean, I've been righteous, God, I deserve X, Y, Z. In some ways, he's actually seeking to compel God. He's making a prayer, an argument. He's begging, going, look, I've done it right, give me. And like all of us humans in some sort of concepts are still children. We have so much more to learn. So looking at old Job there. So what is good and ill itself is a difficult question. If we think about many of the philosophical arguments that we'll go through, like the old trolley car example. You want to give us the trolley car example, Brendan?
It's whether, so there's a trolley car coming down the train track and you're standing in front of a handle and the track diverts and the handle controls the diversion. There are three people tied up on the train track, and if you do nothing, if you don't pull the handle, the train will kill those three people. If you pull the handle, the train will divert onto another track where there's just one person tied up. So if you don't take any action, the three people die, but if you directly take action, the one person dies.
Yeah. Do we pull the handle? Do we leave it just crash into the other? And this is itself an interesting question, depending on whether we are deontological or more utilitarian. Do we look at the outcome? Do we look at the cause? Do we follow someone like we'll cover later in these series of all this and like Kant, and think about the action itself and not the outcome, or do we consider only the outcome? And each have problems. There's no one solution that gives us something that works. So we don't, out of all this, come to understand at all anything to do with how the universe works or God's will. So it's just, we have to live with that. We have no reason to understand why we're here, and we don't get to. We may rail against this, we may complain, but then what about children? If you think about when we send children to preschool, they sit there and they whine and they complain and they don't understand why they have to do it, and they sort of sit there arguing, going, I don't want to go to school. And we do it to them anyway, and we say it's in their benefit. And not many people would thank us, well, for the opportunity of not getting an education and being an outcast later if they had that and we truly allowed it to be there. So it's an interesting dichotomy, and we can think of ourselves in many ways as children. So the work in Job sort of seems to gloss over some of the loss. In some ways, I find that disappointing. The nature of sort of being given some things back is good, but well, we also have a past. So we can look at what we have now and be thankful, but remembering doesn't stop. I mean, my grandfather, I was very close to, died years ago now, and I still remember him, and I still mourn his loss. So people have lost, well, somebody who's lost 10 children and a wife is not going to be in the best of mental states. Probably someone who's going to need a little bit of help and care, a bit of post-traumatic stress syndrome kicking in. So it's interesting, does that all go away? And intellectually, I mean, really, are we going to sit there, even if we had a bit of a chat and know that we aren't perfect, that we're going to just go, oh yeah, that's fine, God. Yep. I mean, yeah, you told me that I could do better, but thanks for killing my 10 children. I mean, it's not really something you're going to sit there and just digest instantly. Unfortunately, none of this is anything that we teach our sort of younger generation anymore, and we produce a completely woke environment where we just assume everything's good and we whine when people don't agree with us, especially if we're involved with XRP. So what are Job's final words? Who wants to take that one up?
I will. Doesn't he like say that I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, and not another. How my heart yearns within me. So he's like, basically, Job's faith is strong, and he is willing to wait and the test of time, and trust in the fact that in the end he will meet God, his maker, Redeemer.
I read something different for his last words. I don't know if I read wrong.
Well, no, I suppose it depends on what version of the Bible you're reading.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's more than one. Pick your favorite these days. Anyway, so Job thinks about suicide. Why do you think he did or didn't do that? And what arguments for and against apply here?
Can I go with that? So suicide is supposed to be the ultimate sin before God. So if you cherish and believe in God, then you would never take your own life. You would suffer whatever is put before you rather than take your own life, and have that faith again in God that whatever happens is eventually because that is what God wants for you. So you need to take the test and go through the test, but never never.
How deep the suffering gets, it's nothing worse than
taking your own life. It's the ultimate sin, I think.
Have that instinct.
Yeah, well, it's not like Ready Player One where you get to restart the game at the beginning. So, Job, his wife, tell us about her belief. What she feel?
She asks him to forsake.
Sorry, what was that, Brendan?
She asks him to forsake God.
Yeah,
Val, if I remember correctly, or am I?
She curses God, doesn't she?
No, she tells Job to curse God. When Job has all the illness, ulcers on him from Satan, she says, just give up already, curse God and be done with it.
Yeah, but do you think that's going to make things better?
No, of course not.
According to the wife, but I mean, we know from the outside perspective that there's a bet going on. So we know, I suppose you could say from outside the universe, outside the story, that it won't make things better. But yeah, why they think it would, why the wife thinks.
And what did you read about the difference? What's the difference between a tree for lumber and a man who is dead?
Okay, so Job believes that a tree can regrow itself once it's been cut down because its roots are still there, so it could regrow. Whereas he believes that if a man is dead, then he cannot come back to life again, which is then kind of proved wrong in the New Testament when Jesus resurrected, sort of thing. But in this particular Old Testament story, Job believes that once a man is dead, he's dead, and he cannot be brought back to life.
I mean, a tree is never going to be the same either. Although trees do sprout, they're not never the same. I own a forestry plantation, and I can tell you when they come up, they come up in big, messy, scrawly type things that, yeah, they don't grow the same. So, what are the different wages? What is the bet between God and Satan?
Satan, there it says he basically can make Job forsake God by taking everything away from him. So God says, okay, we'll see that he won't go and take everything away from him. Don't harm his body in any way. Satan does that.
Yeah, I mean, not kill him, but he does plenty of things that aren't terribly good. And finally, wisdom. We've covered this in a number of ways. I mean, if we go back to Aristotle, we go back into Plato, each have a slightly different nuanced sort of take on wisdom. And it's not intelligence, of course. There's a difference here. And probably a reason why you can be an intelligent youngster, but very rarely a wise one.
I would say it would be knowing the things that you can and can't change.
One example of wisdom in a very specific way that I had was a wise person knows, an intelligent person knows that smoking is bad. A wise person knows how to give up, or that they have to. And working towards that is important. And you can argue, even with something like smoking, that yes, it's difficult to give up, but then putting things in place so that you won't. So that's part of setting up life. I mean, I do things myself. I've gone back to a process that I used to have. I've gone back to going through each of the sort of virtues according to Plato, Aristotle, and old Benjamin Franklin there, and depending on which one, doing a once a week, once a month, and over the whole week, month, and quarter sort of definition of these, and that understandably takes time. So part of developing our own character, not just saying I'm me and screw you, I'm not going to change, but understanding that we can all be better. So that's part of wisdom as well. All right, so we're coming again to the end of our lesson. Lots of references there for people who want to actually and stop sharing. All right, so thank you for attending again. If you guys want to discuss more, I will. I'll get out and let you. But the wisdom books, in my opinion, are very interesting. Sort of, even if you're not Christian or Jewish or Islamic or anything like this. Just the very nature of the questions as to what and why, and what is the nature of the universe and divine, and is there one, very interesting in themselves. So, all right.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, everyone, for attending again.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Have a nice night, guys.